In China versus in Europe and the US, these places have experienced a different trajectory of COVID-19. While China has been dealing with the virus since January, Europe and the US have only been dealing with it seriously since late February. And all three places have dealt with this situation differently. China enacted a fairly immediate lockdown with strict measures, while Europe and the US came later with different lockdown measures, depending on the country and state. As it stands today, Europe and the US are in what we describe as stage 1, the cautious stage, because confinement is still in place, and as a result, consumers are still largely in crisis mode. Stage 2, on the other hand, is what we like to describe as revenge spending, and this is what we are currently observing in China. Deconfinement means store reopenings and the gradual return to normal life. And figures indicate that the average Chinese consumer is eager to resume pre-pandemic consumption. So put simply, we can consider that China is in the recovery process, while Europe and the US still do have some time to go. So let's divulge more on these two stages. According to estimates from the Business of Fashion and McKinsey & Company, online sales have declined 5 to 20% across Europe, 30 to 40% in the US, and 15 to 25% in China. And the apparel market in particular is expected to take a harder hit than others. So these numbers are to say that yes, while we do see decreases everywhere, not everywhere is at the same leg of the race. These differences in numbers could serve as a crystal ball for consumer spending at different stages of the pandemic, which is a hopeful indicator of the resumption of the fashion industry. Another survey by Numerator in early March of American consumers found that 3 in 4 were concerned about the virus, even before quarantine measures began. And the same survey indicated that COVID-19 had already begun to impact the shopping behavior of 1 in 3 American consumers in early March. A survey from Morning Consult conducted in mid-April found that a quarter of American respondents did not think they would feel comfortable at a mall for more than 6 months, which is a fair indicator of the uncertainty of this period and for so many consumers in stage 1. And like the average American, European consumers are cautious too, even as governments across Europe are currently planning step-by-step reopenings. Austrian fashion journalist Lisa Zerngast told Vogue Business, "We are all looking forward to returning to our normal lives again, but we would rather have the measures for a little bit longer just to make sure the situation doesn't escalate." In Austria, malls and department stores are scheduled to open starting May 1st, for example. In Germany, larger retail stores started reopening on May 4th, and in France, they will start on May 11th. The question is how many people the reopenings will draw in, and how eager people will be to spend on apparel. Luckily, though, China is a glimmer of hope for the rest of the industry right now. Because they are lifting or have lifted lockdown, depending on the region, the average Chinese consumer is eager to indulge in luxury and fashion after months without. For example, speaking for the company's first quarter earnings on April 16th, LVMH Chief Financial Officer stated, quote, "We have seen substantial growth rates, sometimes in excess of 50% for the large brands. So it shows the appetite of Chinese people after 2 months of lockdown to go back to stores and come back to their previous pattern of consumption," end quote. And to prove his statement, it seems, an Hermès store recently sold goods for $2.7 million upon its reopening, as a plethora of affluent clients made their purchases digitally visible across platforms like Weibo and WeChat. And since the beginning of the pandemic, e-commerce has seen a 3% increase in China. Jeff Unza, president of strategic partnerships at Border X Lab, a platform that connects American and European e-commerce like Saks Fifth Avenue with Chinese consumers, says, "We thought our sales were going to fall off a cliff at the height of the COVID scare in China, but instead we saw some pretty good growth, with sales up 50 to 70% over that time." In response to these positive numbers, it would appear, China's Ministry of Commerce posted an announcement recently about a new online shopping festival, which will feature 100 e-commerce companies that will run from April 28th to May 10th. It seems that the Chinese government is placing hope of economic recovery and domestic consumption, as Europe and the US will soon come out of lockdown. So it's quite fortunate to see that Chinese consumers seem pretty optimistic. In a report by McKinsey & Company, expected future spending is positive, with spending on footwear and apparel expected to drop by only 0 to 15% in the weeks to come. As we've seen though, European and US consumers are notably less optimistic than their Chinese counterparts, reflecting on their likelihood to spend less even online. Both are expected to spend 50% less than usual on footwear and apparel in the weeks to come.